Welcome back to the Brash Consulting Outstanding Leader Series. It's my absolute pleasure today to be chatting with Susan Alberti AC, business owner, philanthropist, former Vice President of the Western Bulldogs Football Club, and twice nominated for Australian of the Year. Susan, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. When someone has achieved what you've achieved, I'm always fascinated, and maybe it's the psychologist in me, about their life before all of that happened. Mm-hmm. Is it fair to say that you came from fairly humble beginnings?
Oh, most definitely. I grew up in a very difficult area at difficult times. We didn't have any of the frills of life. We had just the bare basics. I had good parents with good values, but we didn't have any of the frills of life, and it was all about survival, I suppose.
Okay. Your father was a policeman?
Yes. And
I remember reading that one of your earliest memories was him doing work for charity and being out in the community.
Yeah, my dad was a great man of incredible values, and he was a member of St Vincent de Paul for about 55 years, and he was always out there looking after the needy and the hungry and the sick. And even on Christmas morning, I would never see my father Christmas morning. He'd be off feeding the hungry, and out of his own wage, he'd be buying gifts for some of the children that he could make a difference. So I guess I learnt those values from a very young age from my father. Didn't have a lot, but he gave of himself.
Do you remember what age you were where you had a glimpse that even with that beautiful upbringing and all of those values that were imbued in you, that you could strive for better, that you could do more?
Yes. I think my earliest recollection of wanting to give back into the community, even though I didn't have much to give back, in fact I had nothing to give back, I was about 6. And I think Dad has instilled those values in me about giving back to the community. But at the same time, I was surrounded by kids that had a lot more than me, and I was never jealous, ever jealous. That was just something that I never even considered or would have been allowed in my family. But I knew that I wanted to be a business person. I knew I wanted to be as successful as I could possibly be. So I had that yearning from a very early age to go on and be in business. I couldn't wait to get out and get into business. That's what I wanted to do. And I think I wanted to do that from about the age of 12. Because I was already doing all sorts of little jobs, pocket money, and then when I could officially work part-time, I started working at 14. So that was really the beginning of my entry into, well, I'm going to try and be as successful as I can.
Okay, so as soon as it became legal, you were there.
I don't know what it was to have a holiday over the school holidays, Christmas. I was always working, and my brother was the same. He was the telegram boy. He worked at the bottle shop and behind the bar, and it was not just because I wanted to improve and do the things I wanted to do, but it was also to help Mum and Dad, because we'd had a meagre existence, and it was helping Mum and Dad too.
Now, you went to a dance hall in Hawthorne,
yes,
and met a very dashing young man, Angelo Alberti, whose name you carry. Mm-hmm. You fell in love, you got married. And you founded Dansu Constructions.
Yes, actually it was originally Alberti Constructions, and then it was changed in '85 to become Dansu, which stands for Danielle, Angelo and Susan. A lot of people don't know that. So we were a pretty formidable team, Angelo and I, but when I met Angelo, he looked very German. He was blonde, blue-eyed and very handsome, and didn't speak any English. And I wondered what was wrong with him, why he didn't talk, and then I found out that he couldn't speak English, but he let his feet do the dancing, and he was rather cute. And of course, it was Alberti for quite some time, and then in '85 we became Dansu, and then it was Angelo and I, we were the directors of the company, and of course, I say the rest is history, all the things we've done.
And some of that history, tragically, occurred in 1995.
Yes, it did. In fact, it was a beautiful sunny Friday afternoon. Angelo decided he wanted to go and check a roof. The plumber couldn't work out what was wrong with the roof leak we had, and he got on his motorbike. Being Italians, he loved speed, he liked motorbikes, but he was also a very good rider. And he went over on his bike and onto our estate, and it was on the corner of Dansu Court where the accident happened. A truck driver went straight through the intersection, didn't stop, and my husband was left on the road with his bike damaged and my husband dying. And of course, 3 weeks later, I had to turn off his equipment and he died because his injuries were so bad.
When you look back at that tragic time, the fact that you were running a business, a thriving business, and you divided up the roles in the business between you and Angelo that played to your strengths. How did you keep going in the business? What were the things you had to do to survive as a grieving wife and as a business owner with so many employees depending on you for their income?
Well, I was trying to deal with grief and my daughter's ill health, and also we had about 300 staff, and they were looking to me for leadership, looking to me for their income, and my husband treated all his men and women like family, and I felt that I needed to continue that. I was uncertain whether I wanted to continue in the building line because we had about 8 projects on the go. I was not a registered builder, so I had to make up my mind whether I wanted to continue, sell off cheaply, and go and get my builder's license. Well, I decided I wanted to go back and I wanted to get my builder's license, which I did. I think I was one of the first women ever in Victoria to get that. But I continued the building work, the different projects we had for about 10 years, mainly also to complete them, and other projects I undertook along the way, but to ensure that all our staff had positions to go to, because as I said, they were like family, and I wanted to ensure that they had jobs to go to, which they did, each and every one of them. I was very proud of that because I knew my husband would have wanted that. But also in the meantime, whilst this was all going on, I was still trying to find the man who really killed my husband because he disappeared from the scene of the accident. So I was also chasing and trying to find him. And I found him up in the Northern Territory by employing a private detective, bringing him back to justice.
You mentioned Danielle's illness, and she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 12. Yes. What was known about diabetes at that time?
There was very little known about diabetes, particularly type 1. We all know that type 2 is usually as your own fault, lack of diet, exercise, etc. And we have an epidemic in this country, which worries me terribly, but that's another story. But with type 1, when Danielle was diagnosed, we didn't have computers, Google, internet, and the only way I could source or find out who was doing what was the white pages and the yellow pages. So I rang around all around the country to try and find out who was doing research, because I'd done the hand-holding bit for about 6 months with other families. I've got to do something tangible. This is not me. I can't hand-hold. I've got to find a solution. And that's my attitude to life. I've got to find a solution. To my dismay, to find out there are only 2 researchers doing research. One of them is still doing it at Walter and Eliza, and the other one has since died, and he died of diabetes complications. He himself had diabetes. To discover only 2 back in the very, very early 80s. Well, of course, it's all changed since then. I became heavily involved in setting up an organisation. Then we became affiliated with the United States, and of course then it spread global, and 35, 40 years later, we've got thousands of researchers doing type 1 research.
And about $25 million that you've raised to actually invest in that research.
Oh, it's been more than that. It's probably over 100.
Unbelievable.
That's in more than 100 that I managed to secure from government, not including all the money I've given. I've given millions myself, but in saying that, I've been able to go to government and say, I'll give X if you'll give X. So I've been able to I'd probably could say I've been responsible for, in fact, more than $100 million, which has gone into medical research into type 1 diabetes.
One of the things that, and as a mother of 4 children, one of the things parents struggle with when they've got a child who's ill or has any special need is how do we go about fighting that instinct to wrap them in cotton wool versus actually allowing them to live a full and happy life. And Danielle wanted to go to New York to be part of the art scene there in her 20s. How long was it that she was actually there living the life you wanted her to live, basically, before you realised she was seriously ill and needed to come back to Australia for a kidney transplant?
Danielle and I made a deal after she finished year 12 and she went on to university. I said, Danielle, once you start something, you've got to complete it. And once you're 21, you can make up your own mind what you want to do. If you want to go and move out and whatever. Not that her father was very happy with that, because being the Italian father, they always like you home until whenever, forever at home. But I encouraged her to find her independence, and at 21 she did move out. She moved into an apartment after she'd completed her degree, and she went off and did some work as a curator. Danielle was a very smart young lady, very smart. And then when her dad was killed, it broke her heart. absolutely broke her heart. She decided she wanted to go and find herself overseas. Had always wanted to do it actually. She went to Philadelphia, completed a master's, then moved on to New York and started exhibiting in New York. But Danielle was always a person that knew what she wanted out of life. She knew she had to work hard. She saw from her parents what they were like. She only knew one thing, was to work hard, to be successful. And that's exactly what she did. But unfortunately her health was failing and she fought through so much sickness, continued to work. Even at university, and when she was doing her master's, she was on a scholarship. She applied for it. It would have been easier for me just to write out a cheque, but no, Danielle was taught independence and taught the value of $1. So she applied for a scholarship, went over there, and as part of that scholarship, she had to put back on campus, which she did. And whilst her eyesight was failing and her health was failing, she was doing that. She was completing her thesis. She's just remarkable. She was remarkable. The strength of character she had and the determination to succeed in her chosen field. So, yeah, she was a very determined young lady. I was very proud of her, actually, very proud.
As you had every reason to be.
Yes, yes. And it's very hard not being a policeman too, because I get these calls in the middle of the night time, you know, Mum, this is happening, that's happening, what do I do? So I didn't sleep so soundly as I should have because of the time difference.
My number 2 boy only has 1 kidney. He was born with 1 kidney. And one of the first fights we had, and something he was angry with us about for many years, was that he wanted to play football.
Well,
and we had to compromise and say, we'll let you play soccer, but only if you're not the goalie.
yeah,
But finding that temptation to sort of hold them close
I know.
and let them find their
It's
independence.
so difficult when it's,
Yeah.
I mean, you're there to protect your children. You give your life for your children, which I would have done, and I did put my hand up to give her my kidney, but you can't wrap them up in cotton wool. They have to be their own person. They've got to be allowed to fulfil their dreams, even though at times I was a nervous wreck, knowing how she was struggling and how sick she was getting and how independent she was, and trying really hard not to be a policeman.
And you were going to give your kidney because you were a compatible donor,
Yes.
but tragically you never got the chance.
I was compatible when I went and did the test, and because I had no family and no backup support in America, I asked if it was safe to take her home, and of course I'd organised everything here in Melbourne with all my network, and the doctor said it was fine. She'd had dialysis that morning. She'd been on dialysis 3 times, and they said she was fine, and of course she didn't make it. And I often wonder whether I made the right decision, bringing her back on the plane. It often enters my mind. Should I have kept her there? But I was told by the experts it was okay. But I still haven't recovered from it. It's 15 years, 16 years this year, and it seems like yesterday. And I often look at her. I've got a beautiful, beautiful portrait of her in my bedroom, and I look at her and I think, I wonder what you'd be doing today if you didn't have diabetes. You loved children. She adored children. I think she would have had a few of her own children, and yeah, so not to be.